That day, I made the decision to take my granddaughter away from that toxic environment. I couldn't let her suffer any longer. For the next 10 years, I raised Xenia on my own, moving overseas to escape the shadows of Caspian and Emberly. Together, we built a new life, just the two of us. When we finally returned to our home country a decade later, Caspian and Emberly came to see us, standing at my door with smiles as if nothing had ever happened. "We missed you," they said, trying to feign a loving family reunion. "After all, we're family. Let's live together." But I wasn't fooled. I looked them straight in the eye and said, "Those who can't appreciate their own children aren't family. Please go back. I'm Saraphina, a 55-year-old widow. A few years ago, I lost my husband and have since lived alone in a large, quiet house. After his passing, I considered moving in with Caspian and Emberly, but something deep down told me that living separately was better. I loved my son, but the tension between us was palpable, and Emberly made it worse. Caspian and Emberly ran a bar, and I knew that if I lived with them, I'd be roped into helping out. I wasn't as young as I used to be, and the thought of serving customers all day felt overwhelming. Besides, I had never been good with people, and my body was no longer up for that kind of work. So I chose to stay on my own. Even after my husband's passing, Caspian never suggested we live together, and I was grateful for that. Finally, I had some freedom after years of caring for others. At first, living alone felt like a blessing. I no longer had to worry about my husband or raise children. I thought I would enjoy the peace and quiet, but as the days went by, I discovered how lonely life could be. With no hobbies or friends, having focused my entire life on my family, the silence in the house became deafening. I spent my days watching reruns of old TV dramas, trying to fill the void. I made a few attempts at new hobbies, but nothing stuck. My life felt empty. The only light in my days came from my granddaughters, Elan and Xenia. Elan, the oldest, was a bright, beautiful girl, always cheerful and full of energy. Xenia, on the other hand, was quieter and more reserved, often fading into the background. Elan received praise for her maturity, while Xenia was often overlooked. My heart ached for her every time Caspian and Emberly brought the girls over. Elan would run to me, dressed in new clothes with her hair perfectly styled, while Xenia wore Elan's old hand-me-downs, her hair messy and unkempt. It was clear that Xenia was treated differently, not just by her parents but even by Elan. While Elan's smile lit up the room, Xenia's eyes were often downcast, her face clouded with sadness. She had once been a lively little girl, but over time she had retreated into herself. I felt a strong protective instinct toward her, even as I tried not to interfere too much in how Caspian and Emberly raised their children. Each visit intensified my concern. Caspian and Emberly lavished attention on Elan while Xenia sat quietly, unnoticed. Whenever I tried to engage Xenia in conversation, Elan would interrupt, or Caspian and Emberly would change the subject entirely, ignoring her completely. One day, I decided to visit Caspian and Emberly at their house. I brought along some sweets I knew the girls loved, hoping to enjoy a nice afternoon with them. As I approached the door, however, I heard shouting from inside. Caspian's voice echoed with anger, piercing through the walls. "Why don't you ever say anything? Just staying quiet all the time." My heart raced as I reached for the doorbell, but before I could ring it, the door swung open. Without hesitation, I stepped inside, removing my shoes. The shouting grew louder as I walked down the hallway. I caught Caspian's voice again, filled with accusation. "You know it's her fault, right? Your silence is embarrassing us." Climbing the stairs, my heart pounded. I found them in an upstairs room. Caspian and Emberly were standing over Xenia, who sat on the floor, her face streaked with tears and her cheeks swollen from being slapped. Elan stood nearby, her hand still raised as if she had just struck her sister. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I pushed past my son and his wife, rushing to Xenia and enveloping her in my arms. She clung to me tightly as Elan watched, wide-eyed. Caspian and Emberly stared at me in shock, but they quickly regained their composure. "Mom, what are you doing barging in like this? You should have knocked first," Caspian snapped, irritation evident in his voice. "That's right, Saraphina. Isn't this a bit rude?" Emberly added, her tone laced with annoyance. I glared at both of them, my anger boiling over. What's rude is how you're treating a little girl, surrounding her like this and yelling. "Caspian, you're her father. Aren't you ashamed of how you're acting? And Elan, why did you hit your sister?" The first time I raised my voice at Elan, she looked startled, her eyes wide with fear. Then she dropped her head, mumbling something. Before she could explain, Emberly pulled her into a tight hug, glaring at me. "Don't blame Elan for this," she snapped, clearly protective of her older daughter. But I refused to back down. I met Emberly's glare with one of my own. A mother's job isn't to shield a child who's done wrong. You should be teaching her right from wrong, not defending her behavior. Caspian, who had been watching in silence, suddenly pointed at me and shouted, "Mom, what are you thinking? Get away from that idiot." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "The idiots are you and Emberly. You owe Xenia an apology." I shot back, my voice rising. "Apologize? Who's going to apologize to her?" Caspian sneered, clearly dismissive. Neither he, Emberly, nor Alon showed any remorse. They continued to insult Xenia as if it were perfectly normal. Xenia, now in my arms, clung weakly to my clothes, her face blank and vacant, as if she had endured this treatment for far too long. Before I could fully process what was happening, I scooped her up and declared, "I'm taking care of Xenia from now on. I can't leave her in this house." Without waiting for a response, I marched out of the room, leaving them stunned. But before I could get far, Caspian followed me, a smirk plastered across his face. "Thanks, Mom. I didn't know what to do with that mute," he said casually, as if he had just solved a minor inconvenience. I was speechless. My own child was treating his daughter like a burden. As I stood there, trying to comprehend his heartless words, Emberly appeared behind him, carrying a small, worn-out bag and a tattered backpack. "Here's her stuff," she said, shoving the bags into my hands without a second thought. "Please take care of the rest." Both Xenia and I stood there, stunned, staring at the cold expressions on my son and daughter-in-law's faces, almost relieved that Xenia was leaving their home without another word. I turned and walked away, struggling to process the cruelty of the situation. When we arrived back at my house, I helped Xenia remove her shoes at the door. As I looked down at her, I noticed she was biting her lip, trying to hold back her tears. The sight of her broke my heart, and I pulled her into a tight embrace, gently rubbing her back. "Xenia, I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't help you sooner, but it's going to be okay now. Grandma's here, and I'm going to protect you from now on." From that day forward, Xenia and I began our new life together. The damage inflicted by her parents had taken a toll. She had stopped speaking altogether. Even the simplest phrases like, "good morning," seemed impossible for her. Her teacher noted that Xenia wasn't communicating at school either, neither with classmates nor teachers. Worried, I took her to the hospital for a checkup. The doctors diagnosed her with selective mutism, explaining that the extreme stress she had endured at home had led to deep-seated anxiety and fear. It wasn't that she didn't want to speak, she simply couldn't. The doctor reassured me that with time and a more nurturing environment, she would gradually regain her voice. On the way home, I bought her a notebook and a colorful pen. "Xenia," I said, handing them to her, "if there's something you want to say but can't, write it in this notebook. You can draw pictures or jot down words. Maybe, little by little, you can try saying the words out loud. It doesn't have to be all at once, just a little at a time, okay?" Xenia opened the notebook and began to write. After a few moments, she turned it around to show me. On the page, she had written, "Thank you, Grandma," along with a small drawing of my face. She opened her mouth as if trying to say the words, but nothing came out. Disappointment washed over her face. I smiled and gently patted her head. "You're doing great, Xenia. You've already taken the first step, and I'm so proud of you. Just take it one step at a time. You've got this." Xenia managed a faint smile, and from that day on she used the notebook to communicate both at home and school. Gradually, her confidence began to grow, and over the next 2 years, she started to speak again. "Grandma, guess what happened at school today?" she would exclaim excitedly when she came home, brimming with joy and life. Seeing her recover and thrive filled me with immense pride and relief. One day, I attended a parent-teacher conference at her school. As we walked into the classroom, a warm and kind teacher greeted us with a smile. "Hello, Saraphina." "Hello, Xenia," she said, welcoming us in. As we sat down, the teacher pulled out Xenia's report card. "Her grades have improved steadily since last year," she noted, showing us a chart that displayed Xenia's academic progress. The trend was clear. She had been doing exceptionally well ever since moving in with me. I smiled proudly, patting Xenia's head. "She's been studying so hard at home. She's always reading books and tackling challenging problems." Since regaining her voice, Xenia had developed a passion for learning. Every time she aced a test, she would bring home the results with a big smile, and I'd hang her perfect papers on the wall. Watching her grow and succeed was the greatest reward of all. "I think it might be a good idea for Xenia to take an IQ test at the hospital," the teacher suggested during a school meeting one day, catching me by surprise. I asked for more details about the IQ test. "An IQ test? What for?" I inquired. The teacher explained that Xenia might be considered gifted, a term used for children with extraordinary intelligence. According to her, Xenia seemed to be exceptionally bright, even more so than many adults. The idea intrigued me. If Xenia was indeed gifted, it would explain why schoolwork appeared too easy for her. The teacher believed that an IQ test could help us determine how best to create a suitable learning environment to nurture her talents. Without hesitation, I took Xenia to the hospital for the test. It turned out the teacher was right. Xenia was indeed gifted with an IQ well above average. I was astonished and amazed to learn of my granddaughter's extraordinary abilities. Later that day, I sat Xenia down and asked, "How do you find school? Do you enjoy your studies?" Xenia, with a bored expression, shrugged. "Honestly, it's too easy and boring. I want to study something more challenging, but when I try to tell the teacher, they just don't understand." Her words made me pause. I wondered if there was a way to challenge her intellectually in ways her current school couldn't. Her academic needs seemed far beyond elementary school level, perhaps even at middle or high school level. But could Xenia, a young girl who hadn't yet graduated from elementary school, handle such advanced studies? I consulted with her teacher again, who mentioned a system in the US where students could skip grades based on their academic abilities. The teacher suggested that moving to America might offer Xenia the opportunity to study at a level more suited to her exceptional talents. This reminded me of my late husband's brother, who had been living and working in the US. Although I hadn't been in touch with him since my husband passed away, I decided to reach out for advice. When I explained the situation, he immediately offered his support, saying he would help us settle into life in America. Feeling relieved, I proposed the idea of studying abroad to Xenia. She listened quietly and then smiled. "I want to go," she said, "but only if it's with you, Grandma. And I want to graduate elementary school with my friends first." I was deeply touched by her thoughtfulness. I agreed. "Of course, we'll wait until you graduate. In the meantime, I'll work on improving my English," I told her. Xenia's smile widened in relief. The next few months were filled with happy memories. Xenia made the most of her final year in elementary school, forming lasting friendships and savoring every moment. When she finally graduated, we exchanged contact information with her friends so they could stay in touch even after our move. I chose not to mention our plans to Caspian and Emberly. I feared they might try to take Xenia back if they learned of her giftedness, only to exploit her abilities for their own gain. Once we moved to America, Xenia adapted quickly. She skipped several grades and immersed herself in her studies with enthusiasm. I supported her in every way I could, and seeing her excitement about learning reassured me that we had made the right decision. As time went on, Xenia's talents truly began to shine. Not only did she excel academically, but she also enrolled at Harvard University, where she studied business. Before long, she had started her own company. "I want to repay you, Grandma," she often said with enthusiasm. But to me, she had already repaid me in the best way possible, by growing into a brilliant, capable, and kind-hearted young woman. Xenia's success didn't go unnoticed. Her achievements were featured in American news outlets, and soon her name was known around the world. She became a celebrity in her own right, and her story inspired many. I often wondered what Caspian and Emberly thought of her accomplishments. Did they regret the way they had treated her? For their sake, I hoped they did. 10 years after Xenia started her company, we had to return to our home country for business reasons. We rented a new apartment, trying to stay under the radar, but one afternoon, the doorbell rang. Thinking it was a delivery, I went to answer it. I opened the door without a second thought, and my heart skipped a beat. "Mom, it's been a while. How have you been?" Caspian's voice hit me like a tidal wave. Standing beside him was Emberly, her smile making my stomach churn. I was taken aback. "Caspian. Emberly, what are you doing here?" Ignoring my confusion, Emberly stepped closer, calling into the house, "Xenia, we've come to see you. It's your mom and dad." I quickly moved to block the entrance. "What do you want? Please, don't come near my daughter." Caspian gave me a pitying smile. "Don't be so cold, Mom. We're still her parents. We just want to see her, that's all." "Yes, mother-in-law," Emberly added with a hint of annoyance. "We're family. Please let us talk to her." Before I could stop them, they pushed past me and entered the house. Xenia, hearing the commotion, peeked out from the living room. "What's going on, Grandma?" she asked, her eyes landing on Caspian and Emberly, freezing in surprise. Caspian and Emberly, however, looked delighted to see her. "Oh, Xenia, look at you. You've grown so much," Emberly exclaimed, reaching out for a hug, but Xenia brushed her off coldly. "If you want to talk, we can do it in the living room." "I'll make some tea," Xenia said, her voice icy. Without waiting for a response, she went into the kitchen. Caspian and Emberly plopped down on the sofa, starting to reminisce loudly as if nothing had ever happened. Feeling uneasy, I glanced at Xenia, who gave me a reassuring wink, signaling she had everything under control. I took a seat opposite them. The conversation soon shifted to the real reason for their visit. Their bar had gone under due to poor management, and their eldest daughter had cut off all contact with them. Now, jobless and struggling financially, Caspian and Emberly were desperate. "Xenia, would you consider supporting us?" Caspian asked, his voice tinged with desperation. You may have left when you were little, but we raised you for 6 years. You owe us." "That's right," Emberly added, her tone pleading. "We're still your family. Let's make up for lost time, live together, and create new memories." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they had done, they were now coming back, expecting Xenia to help them just because she was successful. Before I could speak, Xenia's calm voice cut through the tension. "They're not my family," she said firmly. "My only family is Grandma. Now please leave." Caspian and Emberly stared at her in disbelief, but Xenia stood her ground, walking to the door and opening it. "Goodbye." With the final click of the lock, they slunk away, defeated. I watched them go, still in shock, but when I turned to Xenia, she just smiled. "Grandma," she said, "how about we move?" She explained that she had been secretly planning to build a house for the two of us, designed with accessibility features to ensure I would be comfortable as I age. Overwhelmed with gratitude, I whispered, "Thank you, Xenia," tears welling in my eyes. She just blushed and gave an embarrassed laugh. Several months later, we moved into our new home. The walls were filled with memories we had created together over the years. Even the notebook and pen we had bought when she first came to live with me were framed and displayed. Every time I looked at them, I felt a deep sense of pride and love. Today I decided to cook Xenia's favorite dish. Smiling, I headed into the kitchen, my heart full.